I'm going to record, starting the recording, and welcome to the May edition of the Planetarium web seminar, which I'm now calling Planetarium Zoominar. And this session, we're going to be doing the Planetarium Educators Workshop Part 2. I'll be leading, and my name is Alan Gould. I'm going to share my screen right now, and everybody I think has done this already, signed in. And let me, that's interesting. My view of people in the Zoom, the Zoominar has moved around. So let me change that. And I'm going to go to full screen. Whoops, no, I'm going to go to normal, and then I'm going to go presentation mode. Now, let me know if this shows up okay in your computer.
Looks good to me.
Looks good to me.
Okay. I'm just going to leave it this way for a little while, but I'm going to switch. I'm going to have to switch back and forth because there's going to be a lot of interaction going on. And this may be a relatively short workshop because what we're going to do is part 2 of the Planetarium Educators Workshop, which is much shorter than part 1. Just to do a recap for people who weren't here last week. Let's see, Carrie and John, you were here.
Yep.
But I'll recap, and I'm going to make a comment, which Carl's not here, so I'm going to safely make this comment. But anyway, last week we did part 1 of the Planetarium Educators Workshop, which involved us role-playing, one person being a presenter and trying to describe a word without actually saying the word. Okay, in other words, and everybody else was a student who was trying to figure out what the word was, and the instructor would not be able to say the word, but had to describe it in such a way that the students got it. Okay, so that was the whole idea, but there were rules. Okay, the first round, actually we did 3 rounds, and in the future, in the future of this workshop, I think we'll really only do 2 rounds, because the whole point of that workshop was to see what the value of instructor-student interactions, or in the case of public planetarium shows, the presenter and audience interactions. And so the first rule was that people could not ask questions. The students could not ask questions at all. And there were a few other rules, but that was the key one. And so the instructor could only just describe it. And then there was a final exam where the students would say what they thought the word was and find out, revealed if they actually learned what the instructor was trying to say. That actually... And then the second round, there was a change of rules, and then to make it a little easier for the instructor, where the students could ask questions. And the third round was similarly, students could ask questions, and the instructor could essentially see their work. What we would expect to find in that was that it's much better and much more effective for the students to be able to ask questions. And certainly people were more comfortable with that. But one thing we found also was that it took longer, okay? When the presenter is just doing a lecture, they do their lecture, they stop, and then that's it. But when there's questions allowed, it can take longer, and it should take longer, and it's usually a more lively and interesting and more effective experience. Now, the comment that I wanted to make about the way we did it last week, or last month it was, is that there's a lot of difference between the word that was selected that people were supposed to identify was easy or hard, okay, or somewhere in between. Okay, that's something I discovered as a workshop leader, was that it made a big difference what word you were trying to present. Okay, and the first one that we presented was very easy. Okay, and I think it was John Erickson who was the teacher on that one. And the other factor is that some teachers are more experienced than others and are better at explaining things. Okay, and John, I would have to say, is one of the masters of that. Not only that, but a master of interaction. So that is the first aspect of what word we were trying to use is the topic. So in transitioning into this part 2 of the Planetarium workshop, we're going to deal with the 3 aspects that it's good to think about when you're doing interactive planetarium shows: the subject or topic, the audience or student, in the case of public shows or school shows, and then the presenter or the instructor, depending on which way you want to think of that. And these all are separate things, but obviously, according to this Venn diagram, they overlap, and the sweet spot is right there in the middle where you're considering all 3 things. And so in part 1 of the workshop, the topic was a word. We were trying to identify a word, okay? And there were hard words and there were easy words. What was interesting is that in the successive rounds, I inadvertently chose harder words. So it made it more difficult for the later presenters. Carrie was one of the presenters, and hers was a bit more difficult. And then Carl was a presenter. He got the last one. I think he got the hardest one. But the other factor I was mentioning is that the instructor makes a difference. Okay, their level of experience and what techniques they choose to use. And I think we had a sequence where where there was a decreasing level of experience with the interactive planetarium show. Now, all 3 were experienced, but I think there were different levels of mastery of that. So there was an interesting skew, and I'd like to do that part of the workshop over again, but we're going to do part 2 now, which is these considering these 3 aspects in particular. So let's move to the first one, the topic. Okay, and here's where we're going to have our workshop. Just like last week, and those who weren't here last week, what we did was you need to have a temporary scratch pad on your computer. Okay, and Arthur, you're not going to be able to do this because you're driving in your car. So don't try to write anything.
I promise you I won't.
But if you, on your computer, if you can open up a little text editor or word processor or anything that you can write down things, and then we're going to paste those things into the chat window. So what this is going to end up being is a permanent record of our workshop. Okay, so this is going to be archived, and we'll have the responses, the written responses that are going to go along with the recording of what we're doing. That is the chat that's going to be saved. So here's the instructions. If you for this part dealing with the topic, if you had to select only 3 topics to present in this year's schedule of planetarium programs, and if you want to think of this as next school year or starting this summer, either way is fine. But for your school district, or if you're only dealing with public shows, for your public shows, what would those topics be, and why do you think those would be the important topics to deal with? Okay, So let's take a minute or two, do a little bit of writing. I'm going to stop sharing and do my own writing too. Okay, we'll go for maybe another minute of thinking about this, and I'm going to go ahead and copy mine that I wrote down into the chat window. But then we'll discuss it out loud. Actually, we'll if you haven't written anything, and Arthur, this is where you can participate too. Even though you haven't written anything, you can pipe up and say things. So let's go ahead and start. I can what I thought of was just generally standard-based topics, and at Lawrence Hall of Science, there's more elementary school than middle school people, so we would focus more on the elementary school programs, and there's way more middle school than high school, so we'd focus on the high school. But we also do public shows, so oh, and the reason why that's important, I didn't write down why that's important, so I'll just say it, that's important because teachers are concerned about supporting the standards, depending on what state you're in. In California, teachers are generally concerned with that. And for general public now, what's coming up, I think everybody knows, is the Apollo 50-year anniversary of Apollo. So those are the two ideas I came up with. Who wants to talk about their ideas?
I'll pipe up with an idea. I would talk about satellite, specifically with Starlink and all of the competing satellite internet providers. I have fielded questions from people asking, like, what's that going to do to the night sky? We're talking about it on Domel, that sort of stuff, and being able to talk about why do we have specific orbits, how do we avoid satellite collision. There's a lot that can go into it. That's a public outreach, helping people understand what how and why are we sending satellites up, and especially 12,000 satellites.
I think that's a good contribution. And you know what I'm thinking about, you said that what was discussed on Domel, somebody, I forgot who, posted about the recent launch of I forgot the name of it, Elon Musk's satellites that he's putting up.
Those are the Starlink satellites.
Yeah, the Starlink satellites. Yeah, that could be an important topic, actually.
And if you tie it into higher, high school and collegiate level, you can get into orbital mechanics, and like right now, the Starlink is firing thrusters every 90 minutes during its orbit in order to get to the proper orbit that it wants to, achieve. So every orbit it fires a thruster a little bit. So you can get into things that tie in with video games like Kerbal Space Program. You can get into orbital dynamics, and it's also just something people are interested in and want to know.
Great. Thanks, Arthur. Let's see. The next person to put in something in the chat is Todd. Todd, do you want to say something about what you wrote?
Well, I wrote just some basic ideas because I have no responsibility for schools whatsoever. And I run the Planetarium, whatever I choose to run.
Your sound, actually, I can't quite hear you. Is there...
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
I don't have a school district that I'm beholden to. Our group actually rents the planetarium to do shows for the public and private groups. So it's whatever I want.
Well, that's good. That's a good situation to be in. But you said topics. You wrote specific topics, moon phases.
Yeah, I think that most of the public don't really understand the moon phases as well as they should. They don't understand that the full moon follows the first quarter. And I get people all the time telling me that the moon can't be seen in the daytime and that kind of stuff. So I'd like to start there.
Okay. That's, those two things you wrote, and the reasons for the seasons is the other one you wrote. And gravity you talked about. The first two are the sources of the most common misconceptions. And I hate to talk a lot here because I'm supposed to be facilitating this, but I can't resist saying that I have a relative who we were walking down the street one time in Colorado, and I pointed out the moon. This was during the day, and I pointed out the moon, and she looked up and said, "That can't be the moon." It's not possible, that must be something else.
Did you ask her what
that ever happened?
Did you ask her what it was?
It's
not the moon. What is it?
She was, no, she couldn't come up with what it was. She just couldn't. And I knew that this was a misconception, but I never had somebody close to me that actually had that misconception. John, you want to talk about yours? You need to unmute.
I also started with the moon because I'm working on the summer moon program. And a little bit like the person who said satellites, orbits and orbital mechanics, or just motion in space, is a standard space topic for high school, which we don't have a finished workshop about. And there's lots of good explorations with gravity that would go with that. And I've been working on a program about shadows for first grade, also standards based. And I think it's important because, well, it's accessible. Shadows are all around and kids are curious about them and can actually investigate them firsthand as well as simulated and real in the planetarium.
You got a lot of topics there.
You said
gravity misconceptions. I'm curious about that.
I guess the biggest one is that there's no gravity in space.
Ah, yes. Okay.
So as soon as you get to why things orbit, you've got to make sure that that's dealt with.
I actually had that conversation with a coworker today who was wondering about geosynchronous satellites and how they stayed up there.
Yeah. How do they stay up there? That's a good question. And why don't they fall? Actually, that's a common thing that you see in movies is is something falling to Earth that was in orbit, and people don't realize how difficult that is to actually make happen.
His biggest trouble was that the thing staying in one place in the sky and yet not falling down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a Star Trek episode where the spacecraft was falling to Earth, and I wondered how, they must have expended must have had a burn that allowed them to do that, or forced them to do that.
I always love it when the front of the ship dive bombs towards the planet before the rear of it, like like a fighter jet, because that's what we're used to perceiving. That's what everybody's interacted with. But no one's interacted in space, so it's funny.
Carrie, do you wanna go next?
Sure. I did the moon, like many other people, for the same reasons, because of moon phases and Apollo 11's 50th anniversary coming up rapidly, and then seasons, because that is such a common misconception. And then I added on the solar system because it's covered in the NGSS and also gives good opportunities for people to observe in the real night sky.
Those are three good ones.
Mm.
Dario. Let's see. Dario, do you want to unmute and say something? Say a few words.
Said earlier, you didn't have a microphone.
Oh, it might not have a microphone. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then I'll read it in the chat. He said I would add these to the general school sessions: the Apollo 11 50th anniversary, one of humanity's greatest achievements. Black holes, because they've been in the media a lot. That's a good one. Especially in the context of the next thing that he wrote, gravitational waves. It's and I might add dark energy to that. Gravitational waves, as it gives us a new way to see the universe. And he says he blames cartoonists for the quote only at night moon misconception. That was a response to something we were talking about a few minutes ago. Yeah. Thanks, Dario. Dario, where are you from? Could you type that in the chat? Portugal.
Portugal.
Thanks for coming in so late in your nighttime. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's move on to the next. I'm gonna share my screen again, and we'll go to the next component. Okay, which is I have to readjust things on my screen here to be able to navigate. That's always a tricky thing. But the next thing is the students. Okay, so we'll move. It doesn't matter what order you take these three components of what we're considering be important aspects to consider. But the students, what are the most important things to know about your students when you're planning a program for them? Or in the case of public shows, the audience. And why is this information important? So let's take a minute or two, and write down some responses to these questions. What are the most important things you should know about the students or the audience? And why is that important? Okay, I see the results are starting to come into the chat. So why don't you wind up your writing and put your stuff in the chat? I'll go ahead and put mine in as well. Okay, you can continue writing, but let's get started with a verbal discussion of this. I think Todd was the quickest one on this. Todd, you want to say something about what you wrote?
I type for a living. I get a lot of private groups that come in, and I need to know this kind of information about them so that I give them the best presentation I can. Sometimes I get groups that have been studying for their scout badges, and they really want to know about black holes. They've been talking about it, and I find out that their scoutmasters really don't know anything about it. So they have lots of misconceptions, but those are the things I usually want to know.
And those are things that you actually can ask them during the show if you have an interactive program.
Right, but I want to be prepared ahead of time, so I usually talk to the person who's reserving the program to get that information.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Okay, I'll jump in and say that the things that I thought of right off the bat were the age. Of course, I think that's like the first thing that you think of. How old are these people, and what is their knowledge level? But I also thought if they have any special interests or things that they want to, that they'd like to explore, special interests or focus. And then the other thing that occurred to me is, do they have handicaps? Are there blind people, or are they in wheelchairs, or deaf? And that's an area that is pretty difficult for planetariums. This is very challenging to deal with audiences that have those types of well, I'll call them handicaps or challenges. Carrie.
I'm trying to think if any of mine are different. How much the time they have for the program is a pretty key one, just so you know how deep you can explore a topic or not. And I think the other ones were already covered.
That's an interesting question. Usually, in my experience, there is a set time for the show, and you just have that amount of time. No matter how much they want.
Yeah, sometimes they have 25 minutes instead of 30, though, and just asking, I guess, for special things like that. I think it comes up more with portables than with fixed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
One that hasn't been discussed, so this comes from my time growing up in the planetarium world in Southern Ohio. So we talked about special interest. On the flip side of that, my goal in the planetarium was to be able to actually educate the students and keep them coming back, and ensure that the organizations would bring the students back. And so religious exemptions tended to be something that I had to work around. For example, if they don't want to talk about large-scale structure, that's okay. I will find a topic that works within the bounds of their requirements, such that I know that they'll at least want to keep coming back, and I can flip in. I can discuss the science. Sorry about that. So yeah, religion tends to be one that I was working with heavily in Southern Ohio.
That's intriguing. That's really important too. If they wanted You mentioned that the topic of large scale structure, which also is related to time, long ago times, which is also related to the evolution of the universe. And there's the E word. I think that's what you were, yeah.
Yeah, we talk about, you're talking time. I had young Earth creationists. I had Mennonites in my planetarium. You know, I had all different organizations that, okay, so I can't talk about how old the planets in our solar system are, but I can at least talk about things that scientists discovered and how that makes scientists think about it. And that's the important key parts, as you said, things like evolution versus creationism, and they all wrap it together. But my goal as an educator is to ensure that I can educate and ensure if they're not willing to come back because I egregiously step over their line, then I will not be able to educate again in the future. So I've got to work, you know, diplomatically within those bounds.
Absolutely. I think a lot of places have to deal with that. In Berkeley, we don't have that quite as much. But I know that may be unusual. John Erickson always has some interesting thoughts. John, you want to go next?
One I had that's different from some of the others is, will they have a chance to apply after the planetarium? So if I'm preparing them to go out after dark, step outside your house when it's dark. Some places, some people aren't going to do that. And then I did a program with star maps and constellations and learned near the end that they were all from New Zealand. So, what is it about what I'm showing that's most relevant to what they're going to experience, and what I should just not instruct them to do when they get home because it's not going to work.
That's a good one. And you wrote several others in there that
well, people put it under background, but is their planetarium visit their introduction to the topic, or is it they coming because they've already studied it, or are they coming because what you're going to do for them there is all they're getting in terms of that topic?
Yeah, those are important considerations. That sort of reminds me that some planetariums have like pre-post activities that have been made available but have been not necessarily used or are used with limited success. That's an interesting aspect too.
I had the experience of doing a show in Sydney, Australia, where the audience did not understand how Orion actually looked. It made sense to them because he's on his head in Australia. And once we were able to explain that it was the Greeks and other cultures that came up with this, and it's right side up, it's a lot easier to understand. And I moved the projector to be in Athens instead. Then it made more sense to them, and then we moved it back to Australia again.
That's great. It's like Orion the acrobat.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Dario, do you want to say? Oh wait. Dario wrote what they already know about the topic I'm presenting. So this is what he would like to know, so he can tailor the presentation or interaction with them. That's great. So that's something you can also ask a question by asking questions during the planetarium show. You can get a sense of that. Let's see, did I miss anybody? Ready to go to the next, the third and final element that we're going to consider in planetarium shows. So let me share my screen again, and we'll look at that one. Okay, so we've talked about the topic. We've talked about the, we just talked about the students. I have 2 slides that are the same thing. But the question, okay, so ignore this students here and call it the instructor. Okay, my mistake. It's the instructor that we have to consider as the third aspect. And the questions that we're going to focus on are, what are the 3 of the most effective instructional techniques that you have used? Okay. And why are they important in helping students learn? Okay, so let's blank out here for a second. Everybody do your writing, and then we'll convene again to discuss it. What are the 3 most effective instructional techniques you have used? Okay, let's, you can keep on writing, but make sure that you're listening as you write, because let's open up a discussion on this. Let's see. Once again, Todd was the first, Todd was the quickest on the gun here. You want to go first, Todd? Todd, you're on mute.
The others typed more than I did. I find that storytelling and discussion is a great way to engage the audience and have them participate. When they participate, they learn, and it lets me, the instructor, know that they understand what's happening. And demonstrations can be fun too.
Yeah, I like all of those. And in fact, one of the ones I have was similar to yours, but I think it's a little different. I think you were talking about sort of whole group discussions, or, you know, the whole audience involved in a discussion. But another aspect or another angle for that is to have small group discussions where the group is working on something to solve a problem. Okay, then usually after that you have a whole group, I mean a whole audience discussion. after that, but or a report out of some sort. So there's different ways of doing discussions, and then the two others that I mentioned are asking questions and encouraging the audience to ask questions. Those are basic things that I would go for, and I think others probably came up with that. Carrie, what were you thinking of?
Let's see. Questions, of course. I like to start out with the first couple of questions I do being very easy for everyone to answer so that everybody can participate and start out feeling successful. And kind of a general one is, what do you observe in the sky? And then let's see. Oh, wait time. So after asking a question, giving people a few seconds to reflect before I start taking answers. And then I didn't really finish this third one because I got distracted listening. Taking other ideas after getting the desired one. So that's asking a question, and then even after I get the desired answer, still hearing from a couple more people, just so that they don't get trained to stop, I guess, to stop thinking of other possibilities.
That kind of goes along with the wait time, actually. It's
Yeah.
the more patience you have, the more people are able to think about what's going on and what their contribution could be, and then you get more contributions. Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, and I was interested in your comment that I was saying keep on writing, but listen too.
Yeah.
That's hard.
So that's hard to do. Yeah, I mean, you can't do that. That's a good thing to know and to keep in mind. I'll have to alter my workshop techniques. John, what can you illuminate?
Well, let the planetarium answer the questions when you can. I didn't think I'd like a digital planetarium when we made the switch, but there's so many ways that whatever they ask, you say, well, let me show you something. What does it tell you about your question? And they're being more like scientists that way. Free exploration before a guided activity. I've been thinking about that because of the moonball activity I've been doing for many, many years.
For phases of the moon.
For the phases of the moon, you hold a moon in front of the light and you get a new moon, and then you move it to the side and you get a waxing crescent and so forth. If the first thing you do is just say, hold your moon in different places and see what it looks like, and even 15 seconds of that, before you tell them to do anything, they're starting to figure it out, and it gives a big leg up. So that's one example of just letting them use the materials and see some things for themselves before you tell them what to look for. And another I've been doing recently is text on the dome. Gives a nice support for learning new vocabulary and attaching ideas to the words you use to talk about them. Or it helps people understand what questions being discussed. So I was doing a shadow program that we're developing, and we had, whenever we identify the light source that's making the shadow, I can hit the button and the word light source comes up, and then, but we also have to look for and hit the button object that blocks the light. So every time we're analyzing some situation, we get text to support what we're looking for.
Those are great. As usual, John, you have valuable contributions. Thank you for that. And here's the contribution from Portugal. Dario says, a reasonable dose of humor, asking questions and building the presentation with their answers, a narrative for the constellations. Yeah, humor. We forgot about that. That's a good one. Thanks for adding that from over there in Portugal. All right. And you know what? We're approaching the end of what we needed to do today. But there's two more things that I want to just throw out there. One is just to announce that next month we are going to have a Zoominar next month, Planetarium Zoominar, and but it's not going to be Planetarium Educators Workshop Part 3. We're going to take a break from the Planetarium Educators Workshop, and we're going to listen. We're going to have a word from Chris Reed, who I remember reading an article in the Planetarium about music copyrights, or the challenge of how to have music in your planetarium legally. So that's going to be the topic, because there's many planetariums or planetarians for whom that is, there are misconceptions, or in some cases no knowledge at all. I know that was the case with me long ago, and it pretty much still is. I need to learn more about that. So we're going to have a seminar with Chris Reed. It's not so much a workshop, but he's going to do a presentation, and we'll have a beefy question and answer period with that.
Is it just music and sound, or will we be addressing images and alike? Because that's also
I think, yeah. Well, we can ask him. Actually, he wanted to know what people wanted to hear about, actually. So I'll mention that to him, that there's an interest not in just music and sound, but also images, if he has any information about that. In fact, does anybody else have any feedback or questions that I should give to Chris to think about?
I second John's request for visuals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And the last thing I wanted to do was sort of debrief this session. I wanted to get a sense of, how, whether you thought it was valuable or how it could be improved, or, the usual what was good and what was bad, or usually what was good and what could be improved is the usual terminology. And Carl came in a little bit late. And I'm just wondering, Carl, are you in a place where you can unmute and say a word about, have you been listening in and have any thoughts? Because you didn't write anything, but I just want to give you a chance to say something if you wanted to.
I think he's muted.
Yeah. Carl, are you there? Unmute. Okay. He might not be there. Maybe he was. People sometimes walk in and out of the Zoominar, which is okay. But does anybody else have any final comments about this, or was this at all valuable?
Well, I will tell you, as the blind member of this, I appreciated you reading off the member who couldn't speak Dario stuff. So that's always good practice, and I appreciated it.
Thank you. It was the least we could do for somebody up that late in Portugal.
That's interesting to hear other people's ideas about these things. There are people who came up with some that I wish I had chosen. So good stuff out there.
Anybody else? Final thoughts? Well, you know what? It's not against the law to end early. We don't have a set period of time. Usually it's about an hour. We haven't gone an hour, so I'm not going to say that we have to go for another 5 minutes. So if there's no violent objections to this, we're gonna sign off here, and I want to thank everybody for coming.
Shall we unmute and applaud?
If you want.
The tradition, isn't it?
I'm going to, in fact, I definitely wanted to get that in before stopping the recording.
Thank you.
And I wanted to make a point that you're applauding yourselves because this was a workshop. Okay, thanks again for coming, and we'll see you next month. I'll put out an announcement to the to PPA and to DOMEL and get the word out of when and where and who and what. Okay? Take care.
That's great. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Alan. Take care.